All right, let's talk about something that feels like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Human cloning. I mean, we live in this incredible age of genetic breakthroughs, right? So why is creating a human copy still so firmly off the table? Let's get into it. For like ever, the whole idea of creating a copy of ourselves has been this thing we can't stop thinking about. You see it in books, you see it in blockbuster movies. We're obsessed with exploring the promise and, yeah, the absolute terror of it. It really gets to the core of what we think it means to be human.
And that really is the big question, isn't it? We've all seen the headlines. Scientists have cloned sheep, cats, dogs, even primates, our closest relatives. So what's the deal with humans? Is the problem a technical one? Is it an ethical one? Or is it something else entirely?
To really get why we can't just clone a person, we first have to go back to the beginning. And that means talking about the most famous sheep in history, Dolly. Her story is basically the blueprint for how all of this works. Okay, so let's break down the process. It's got a fancy name, somatic cell nuclear transfer. But here's the gist. You start with a regular body cell, say a skin cell from the animal you want to clone. Then you take an unfertilized egg from a donor and you carefully suck out its nucleus, which is basically its genetic instruction manual. Now, here's the crucial move. You pop the nucleus from the body cell into that now empty egg. You give it a little zap of electricity to get things going, and bingo, it starts developing into an embryo. That embryo is a perfect genetic copy of the original animal. You implant it, and you wait. Sounds kind of like a recipe, right? Well, the reality is so much more complicated. And that complicated reality, that's our first massive roadblock. This isn't just about tweaking a few things in the lab. We're talking about huge, fundamental biological barriers that make trying this on humans incredibly dangerous and frankly impossible to do safely right now. For starters, let's just look at the numbers. Dolly was an absolute miracle of science, no doubt, but she was the one single success out of 277 attempts. Let that sink in. 276 failures. That's a success rate well under 1%. Those failures were embryos that died, miscarriages, and stillbirths. Now, can you imagine trying a procedure with that kind of failure rate on humans? It's not just irresponsible, it's completely unthinkable. So why does it fail so spectacularly often? Well, it all comes down to something called reprogramming. See, in nature, when a sperm and egg meet, there's this beautiful, perfectly orchestrated process that resets the DNA, getting it ready for a brand new life. Cloning tries to do that artificially. It tries to take the DNA from an adult cell and force it to forget it's an adult cell and act brand new again. We're essentially trying to hit a factory reset button, but we don't really know how the button works. And that messy, forced reset, it leads to all sorts of catastrophic errors.
And those errors have really serious consequences. An adult cell's DNA isn't a blank slate. It's carrying a lifetime of what you could call molecular scars. The cloning process often fails to correctly flip the right genetic switches on and off. This is a whole field called epigenetics, and that leads to completely unpredictable problems. We saw this with poor Dolly. She developed arthritis early and died young, which strongly suggests this whole process can cause premature aging and a ton of other health issues.
But okay, let's just imagine for a second that we waved a magic wand and fixed all of those technical problems. Perfect success rate, everything's safe. We'd immediately slam into a second, even bigger wall. And this is where the conversation completely shifts from what science can't do to what science agrees it absolutely shouldn't do.
And this is maybe the most important point of all. A clone would be a genetic twin, just born later. But you aren't just your DNA. Think about everything that makes you you. Your memories, your personality, your experiences, your consciousness. None of that stuff is written in your genes. A clone wouldn't be a copy of you. They would be a brand new, totally unique person. This is why that heartbreaking idea of cloning to bring back a loved one who has passed away is built on a total misunderstanding of who we are. You just can't replicate a person's spirit or their life. The cloned would be their own person, and they'd be forced to live in the shadow of someone they could never, ever be. Can you imagine that psychological burden? This is exactly why there's a rock-solid global consensus against this kind of cloning. I mean, think about it. How can a person consent to being created as part of an experiment? They can't. It immediately opens the door to treating human life as a product, something you manufacture to serve a purpose, whether it's to replace a lost child or, in darker scenarios, to be a source of organ donations. It just completely undermines the idea of human dignity.
Now, I have to pause here because this is a really, really important distinction to make. When you hear the word cloning in the news these days, it's almost never about what we've just been talking about. It's referring to something very different with a completely different mission.
So here's the difference. On one side, you have reproductive cloning. The goal is to make a baby, a whole person. That's the one that's universally banned. But on the other side, you have therapeutic cloning. It uses the exact same starting technique, but the goal is totally different. The idea is to create an embryo only to get its amazing stem cells for medical research. The goal isn't a person, it's a tool that could let us study diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and maybe one day even grow custom replacement tissues for people. This is where the science has unbelievable medical promise.
So let's bring this all home. The final answer to why we can't clone humans today is really a powerful 1-2 punch. It's a combination of the brutal scientific facts and some deeply held ethical wisdom.
And here's the real takeaway. The fact that we don't clone humans isn't a failure of science. In a way, it's actually one of its greatest successes. It's a sign that the scientific community understands that it has huge responsibilities, and that it's learned to ask not just, can we do this, but more importantly, should we? So I'll just leave you with this to think about. In a world where our technology is constantly racing ahead of our wisdom, is this boundary we've drawn a restriction on progress, or is it maybe one of the best signs we have that humanity knows when to choose restraint over just pushing forward no matter the cost?